Welcome class to my final presentation for MIS605. This is Nick Bowersox, and over the next few minutes we'll talk about my approach to this project and how I went about implementing the system setup for the bike sharing system. So the overview of the presentation is as follows. First, we'll talk about what is the bike sharing system, followed by a system overview. Next, we'll discuss the organization of the system. And then we'll briefly look at some sample database tables using a relational database system. Then we'll look at some security features and issues. And we'll conclude with some of the major tasks that are needed to get the system up and running. So, what is the bike sharing system? Well, I think the picture there kind of depicts quite well what it really is. Essentially, in a nutshell, it's going to be a system in a mid-sized metropolitan area where users can essentially rent bicycles. How do they go about renting the bicycles? Well, the main gist is that there is a computer terminal at a bike docking station. There will be multiple bike docking stations throughout the city, and users can rent a bicycle by paying at the terminal, which will then unlock a bike for them, and they'll be able to use that bike for X amount of time and are able to return it to one of the various bike docking stations throughout the city. When they return it, essentially a time is computed for how long they rented the bicycle, and they would pay their bill. And of course, the course directions for this project provide the various pricing schema. I won't talk about that here, but essentially, of course, they can buy a day pass or they can get an actual annual subscription, which saves them some money if they're going to be someone using this bike system regular or on a somewhat frequent basis. So really, essentially, you're actually already starting to see these bike sharing systems in cities already. In fact, in Columbus, Ohio, where I live, they do this already, except instead of bikes, it's actually battery-powered scooters. And you can rent these and drop them off at various docking stations throughout the downtown area. And so the idea is already kind of catching on. But that is essentially what the bike sharing system is. So getting more into the actual MIS aspect of it, we'll talk about the system overview. And before we talk about a system overview for this, let's first define what a business process is. So a business process, according to the textbook that we used, is a process focused on achieving a goal for a business. And this particular bike system uses or has three operational business processes. There's that of bike renting, there's that of user management, and finally there's that of billing. The bike renting system is one of the three processes, and this process is initiated when a user buys a day pass at a docking station to go use the bike. Equivocally, this could also be initiated when an annual subscription is purchased. And an annual subscription may also be able to be purchased not just at a docking station, but perhaps it could also be purchased via the internet. They could be sitting at home on their tablet and log on to the company site and purchase a annual subscription also. The second business process is user management. So for this system, this process refers to the bike sharing software that basically automates everything from the process of checking out the bike to the end of the transaction, we'll say, where the bikes are returned. And so within that, that's a very complex thing. It's not quite as easy as it sounds. This user management system needs to be able to do a lot of different things. It needs to be able to compute, for example, the time the bike is checked out to the time the bike is returned. It needs to be able to know what station the bike was rented from, what station the bike was returned at, so that it can keep track of the inventory at the various docking stations that exist. And then the third business process is that of billing. So this is the process that controls the payment. It definitely relates to the two processes above. Obviously, when you rent a bike, you have to pay for it. And obviously, when you pay for it, as with any online system nowadays, it's quite likely that your credit card information may be part of your user profile. And so it might link up with the user management process if you think about it that way. However, it correlates essentially with the credit card being used to pay for payment. So those are the three business processes. The organization of the system. So the system obviously is going to have software, hardware, and database components that are needed. The software components primarily is software needed to verify the credit card payment. And more than likely that software will come from some third-party vendor. There are various vendors that exist that can process credit card payment information. For example, Discover Card, MasterCard have their own systems. There's plenty of others that do exist. The actual hardware itself, so the needed hardware would include several pieces. We would actually have to have the physical bike stations and all that equipment that's part of that station. We would have to have network equipment as well as a server. And so those pieces of hardware are important because it allows our terminal that the customer interacts with to be able to connect with the internet or the third-party company that verifies the credit card so that the person can actually pay to get a bike to rent. With this hardware, the customer is really going to only interact with two things. First, that's the touchscreen monitor, where they're going to touch the various options and it's going to prompt them to insert a credit card. They'll insert the credit card into the second thing they'll interact with, that's the credit card reader, and then that'll process their payment. And for them, that's really all they interact with other than taking the bike. The database components, now when we think about this, the database is going to have to be quite complex. It's going to have to track a lot of information essentially. It could be of various forms, but for this project I'm going to say it's going to be a relational database. It needs to track customer information of various types, credit card information, rental times, inventory, etc. And on the next chart, I try to allude to, it's a very simplified example, but some of the main database tables that might be present in such a database. You could have, for example, 5 different tables. One could be an order table where you have the order ID as well as the customer ID. And those rows essentially correlate to other tables. So you could have a table called order details where it tracked details about each specific order. There you see we have start date of the rental, end date of the rental, the equipment ID. So each bike would have a specific ID associated with it. We would have a customer table that tracks information about the customer, their age, their gender, their name, their address, phone number, all those good things. We would have an equipment inventory table that would track the equipment ID, perhaps the type of bike or the model of bike. It may have a bicycle key ID to be able to unlock the bike, a station ID that the bike might be associated with, as well as possibly records on when the bike was last serviced. And then a fifth and final table, and I think in the real world it would certainly be a little more complex than this, but a fifth and final table might be the equipment type. So moving on to security features and issues, there are several security issues present. First is that of payment security. You need to have a secure system that prevents identity theft and keeps customers coming back. The solution that I have proposed is to use the latest point-to-point encryption technology. This protects the cards from being stolen by skimmers or malware devices, and also to make sure that the processing system is PCI Level 1 compliant and Payment Application Data Security Standard validated. So this helps to ensure the cards have not been reported lost or stolen, and that they have sufficient credit available so you're not lending someone a bike when they really don't have enough credit on the card. There's also, for a the concept of issues, there's physical world limitations. We could lose connectivity to the power grid. That is a possibility if we are hardwired into power. And so a possible solution for that might be to make sure this bike station, or all the bike stations, have backup power sources on them. For example, perhaps something that can collect solar energy, and there's a solar battery that can power the system. And then a third issue could be the threat of vandalism. Obviously, in any major city of any size, you run the fear that your bike docking station might get graffitied, broken, or disabled in some way by vandalism. You might just have riffraff hanging around it, and people aren't encouraged to utilize the services. The main solution for this isn't a catch-all that's going to fix everything, but certainly keeping the docking stations in busy, well-lit areas will help at least deter some of those threats of vandalism. And then finally, what are the major tasks? So I kind of took a development approach here. To get this system up and running, there's 5 major things. You want to analyze, plan, and understand the system that you need. So you should have a thorough review of the business requirements in the process and map those to the project plan. You should design, develop, and build the system. Third, you're going to train, test, and accept it. And then you're going to further refine it based on those tests that you ran. Fourth, you're going to implement the system and it's going to go live. So that means the bike docking stations are going to be active and people are going to be able to rent bikes. And once that's happened, step 5 is really just providing continued support to the system. That means updating the system as need be for security threats, new hardware, software updates, etc. And just in quick summary, these are the topics I talked about. So I went over the basics of what the bike sharing system is, all the way up to the major tasks. And I think that concludes my presentation. So thank you very much for your time, ladies and gentlemen. And it's been a pleasure being in class with you. And I will sign off, and I'll see you in the discussion forum. Thank you.